We've got 1.5 million foreigners here, by the way, on benefits. They should all be encouraged to go home. However, which way you do it, either by encouraging their governments to take them back or paying them money to go, whatever that price is, however eye-rollingly big it might seem, it will be a drop in the ocean by comparison to the cost of having them here in perpetuity.
What's the greatest threat facing Britain today?
The entire nation state that is the United Kingdom, and I would argue that every Western civilized state is basically facing the same threat. Perhaps the United States now under Trump is facing it to a lesser extent, but the threat is this. It's what I would call the liberal global order, the order that has emerged over the last 30 or 40 years, where the belief is that, and this is a generous interpretation of what the belief is, but the belief is that through global cooperation, integration, actually I should say integration rather than cooperation, global integration, the governance of nation states with the global order in mind as opposed to national interest in mind, we have effectively significantly done away with that which was the United Kingdom, that which was Germany, France, and so on. And you see this much more starkly, of course, in Europe, where they've even taken borders down to create the Schengen zone. But you see it in the UK. We've got broken borders. Immigrants are given every right, if not greater rights, than British citizens. We've coupled mass immigration with the regulatory and legal framework that is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is the putting a protected blanket, affording a protected status to ethnic minorities and minority religious beliefs, minority sexual preferences, sexual ideologies in this country, saying to this group that actually, you will be promoted into work, you will be given better shake of the dice when it comes to promotions, you will be protected, frankly, in the criminal justice system. And so we've basically, in this pursuit of global prosperity, global integration, the promotion of everyone other than our own people and our own interest, done away with the democratic sovereign unit that is the United Kingdom. And it is the end of nation states that I think we face. That's the biggest threat, is the existential threat that nation states in the West face. And I think Trump has seen that. And, you look at the policies that Trump espouses, in a nutshell, they do away with everything I've just mentioned.
You talk about the end of the United Kingdom as a nation. That sounds quite stark to some.
Yeah.
From a demographic perspective, if you look at immigration levels, the white population in Britain is declining as a percentage, and will likely become a minority within our lifetime, or maybe in my lifetime. I don't know.
Yeah.
For you,
it's already
is
a
that
minority in London,
right? And in Birmingham and other places, Leicester. Is that a problem for you? Is that something that you're concerned about?
The rate of demographic change is of massive concern to me. All civilizations evolve, but they evolve slowly if they're to evolve as integrated, settled cultures. When you get the kind of dramatic change in the constitution of a population that we've experienced in the last 30 years, particularly in the last 5 years, I don't know if you noticed that, Steve, the last 5 years has been utterly dramatic.
The Boris wave.
Yeah, I mean, it's been visual, and when you have that rate of demographic change, irrespective of the ridiculous policies we've got in place to exacerbate the problems associated with that demographic, even if you set those aside, no positive program of integration, no positive program of bringing those cultures in, making sure that they adapt to our culture, that they adopt our values and our belief systems, is going to be capable of succeeding. It's just impossible.
And why is that impossible? Is it a numbers issue? Is it because they come from cultures that are completely alien to ours? Why isn't integration possible on that scale?
It's a bit of both, isn't it? It's people coming from cultures that are different to ours. I mean, even people coming from Eastern Europe, they may be Christian, and they may have ostensibly more in common with us than those coming from further afield. But even integrating those cultures was, not easy. Do you remember when we had the first wave of Eastern European immigrants coming to the United Kingdom? The whole point about a society, the whole point about a nation state, is that it should have an integrated, settled culture. It doesn't have to be some kind of utopia. We never had a utopia. When I grew up, we had our own little problems, but they're all British problems. And now what we've got is we've imported problems from the rest of the world into the United Kingdom. And particularly when you look further afield, we've brought in cultures that are often antipathetic to our culture. They stand in opposition to our culture. So I know we're probably heading towards a discussion on Islam, and I'm glad to talk about it. Islam is a religion which, by definition, poses challenges to the settled British culture, because the settled British culture, though it's Christian, has removed religion pretty much from the political landscape. So we have a kind of secular form of governance. Islam won't remove itself from governance, from the legal system, from the way that people, very sturdily practice their private lives. And Islam has an added challenge in that their book, the Quran, is the word of God as transcribed by the Prophet Muhammad and dictated to him by the angel Gabriel. And because it is the word of God, it is perfect. And because it's perfect, it's incapable of being improved or changed. And that means that there's a propensity in Islam. I'm not saying all Muslims are of this ilk, not at all, but there's a propensity in Islam to be fundamentalist and be unable to deviate from fundamentalism. I often hear politicians talking about extremist Islam, and of course we should be worried about extremism in Islam, but a stepping stone to extremism is fundamentalism, an inability to bend, an inability to discuss challenges to your religion, your ideology. And because Islam is a much bigger framework than Christianity, because it does come into the state, it does come into the judicial system, if you have a fundamentalist form of approach to it, then making it integrate with our very delicate Christian political ecosystem is extremely challenging. And, we are seeing the challenges that Islam poses in this country. And I should also add that Islam itself is not one ideology, it's not one religion, and it changes over time like many things. But the particular form of Islam that we see being practiced increasingly across the Middle East and in Pakistan and Afghanistan and so on is of a Wahhabi, purist, fundamentalist nature. And that significantly is the form of Islam that we have imported into the United Kingdom. You bring in that form of Islam, and then you make matters even worse by putting a protective blanket round it and saying, you're welcome to come to our country, you're welcome to settle here. Moreover, we won't seek to integrate you. You can practice your religion. You can even practice your law as long as it doesn't directly conflict with British law. When you do that, what you've done actually is disarm the democratic majority in the United Kingdom, because you've given protected status to this group. And as I mentioned earlier, you see that even in the criminal justice system. And you allow this group effectively to take control of what's happening in the United Kingdom. And that is what we're seeing. And so just going back to where I started on the liberal global order, in the pursuit of being nice to all people and treating all people equally, we have treated immigrants actually better than we treat our own citizenry. And in the pursuit of the promotion of their human rights and their right to practice their religion, their right of belief and so on, we've set aside our own rights. And fundamentally, that is anti-democratic, because it's the majority in this country whose interests should be promoted, not the minorities. But we have a culture now, through this regulatory and legal framework, where the minorities are promoted. And through that, and I'm coming full circle, we're setting aside the nation state that is the United Kingdom.
A lot of discussion about culture there, and I know that sometimes talking about immigration can quickly descend into so-called British values.
Yeah.
And talk of, what makes us British culturally and what our values actually are.
Yeah.
But I want to come back to the question of ethnicity and whether Britain should be ethnically British. Is that important? So let's say that we import people from around the world and somehow they integrate into what are known as British values in an incredibly vague and undefined term, which I think is used by politicians to basically ascribe whatever their values are suddenly British values. For example, tolerance of LGBT people is suddenly a British value in many people's eyes. So this talk about values versus culture and ethnicity, Where do you come on that scale? Where do you think it's important that Britain is ethnically British, or do you think that doesn't matter and it's all about culture and it's all about values and we're just a nation of ideas?
So all civilizations evolve. There is a natural rate. That rate may accelerate from time to time, it may slow down. No civilization, no settled culture can evolve dramatically. That's impossible. And I mean, for me, the color of your skin is not relevant, frankly. And I'd be a turkey voting for Christmas if I said ethnic purity was, the key principle by which I should be guiding my political philosophy, because my father's Pakistani. I can tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, that red, white, and blue flows through my veins. And why do I know that? I know that because I'm extremely proud of this country. I'm extremely proud of its history. I'm very proud of the British Empire. I think it was a force for good. What we exported, the benefits we exported, far outweighed any of the damage that people claim we did, and on occasion, of course, people did do damage. We weren't an empire that was born out of conquest and military determination. We were an empire that was essentially created by being led through commerce, by going abroad, convincing people to cooperate with us, trading with them, and taking control in a completely different way, without design. A lot of the European empires were with design. And out of our empire came, at the time that we were our most powerful, the cancellation of the slave trade, the cancellation of the right to own slaves, the imposition of our belief system, globally. We went around the high seas policing it at vast cost. Out of that empire came our very freewheeling form of commerce, our trading, which comes through our common law, which is increasingly, we haven't talked about law, but our common law system has increasingly been infected with the civil code of, the approach of the Europeans, which I think is really detrimental to the United Kingdom. We exported common law. Common law forms the basis of many other countries' judicial systems now, because it's such a brilliant law, though, increasingly getting infected, as I said. And from all of that came our free speech and a very delicate form of constitutional political ecosystem that we are. We're a very advanced society.
The deportations program is interesting. So you support mass deportations for illegal migrants.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the legal aspect here? You talked about repatriation of some legal migrants. How would that work? How many people are we talking about? Can you just go through that?
Yeah.
process?
So the first step, we've got 1.5 million foreigners here, by the way, on benefits, but which is interesting. So I think they should all be encouraged to go home.
How would you encourage them to
Well,
go
I think
home?
you've got to pay them money. You've got to give them an incentive to go. And whatever the price, however which way you do it, either by encouraging their governments to take them back or paying them money to go, whatever that price is, however eye-rollingly big it might seem, it will be a drop in the ocean by comparison to the cost of having them here in perpetuity. The 1.5 million foreigners on benefits is costing us, according to Migration Watch, £10 billion a year. Now, I think they're wrong on the low side. I can't see how they could get away with such a low figure. That's about £6,700 a head. The average benefits bill is around £14,000 a head. So I suspect the figure's bigger. So from a purely economic perspective, there's great benefit in paying people to go. And Sweden, I think, has such a program. And before we came on air, we talked about moving the centre of gravity of acceptable political discourse to a position which allows us to do what's right to save the country. This is one such issue. People watching this will think, oh my goodness, you can't be deporting legal migrants. I'm not talking about deporting legal migrants. I'm talking about repatriating people to their countries. They came here on a work visa. They came here to study, whatever it was. When that's over, please go back to your country. And until we get that system under control, as I say, there should be no granting of indefinite leave to remain, and there should be no granting of British citizenship.
Right, I've got to talk about reform because this was obviously your deputy leader of reform.
Yeah.
You're very critical of reform in many ways. Do you think Nigel Farage would make a good prime minister?
I now, before I speak any further, even though what I'm about to say by those who are die-hard Nigel Farage supporters will be interpreted as being bitter and twisted, in his own words, I'm neither bitter nor twisted when it comes to Nigel Farage or reform. I'm 59 years old. I just want this on the record, Steve, because people keep saying, oh, why won't he shut up? I'm 59 years old. I'm well off. I've had a great life. Maybe I've got 20, 25 years left to live. I had the great benefit of living in a country that had a settled culture. I am on the political stage, not because I want to be Prime Minister or I want to advance myself politically. I'm on the political stage because I am deeply concerned about the direction of travel of this country. And as I said, I think the nation state that is the United Kingdom is threatened. That's why I'm doing it, okay, for the record. And people can believe me or not, that's their prerogative. Therefore, reform has to do the right thing. It's not about reform being politically expedient, doing what's required in order to get into power. Reform has to do the right thing at every single level, because there will be no point having what we hope will be a pro-British, small c conservative government if that government has had to use mechanisms to get into power which neuter its ability to save this country. There's no point. Might as well just give up now, okay? Now, reform has sold itself, and this is what I believed when I was deputy leader, sold itself as the party that will do that, unashamedly do it. But I see a number of things going wrong with Nigel Farage. First and foremost, I'm going to spell it right out, okay? Nigel, in my view, doesn't have a settled political, philosophical framework. He has a general view of where he wants to go, but I think first and foremost he is a political expedient. And the reason I say he's a political expedient is because of the experiences I've had with him. And let's just go back to Brexit. Nigel knew the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson put forward was awful. We all knew in the Brexit Party it was awful. And you will find many clips on other media channels. GB News didn't exist in 2019. You'll find many clips of Nigel denouncing the withdrawal agreement. But then we came round and we supported Boris Johnson, ostensibly because we feared a Jeremy Corbyn government, second referendum, and losing Brexit altogether. Fine. That was a decision Nigel took unilaterally, without discussion, but fine. But having taken that decision, knowing that the withdrawal agreement was rubbish, Nigel had an obligation to stay on the battlefield in 2020. He had an obligation to this country, to the people that he marched up to the top of the hill with a promise of a proud, independent, sovereign United Kingdom, not to swan off into the sunset. And for what it's worth, I have stayed on the battlefield non-stop since 2019. I fought the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is the creation of the Irish Sea border through Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement, which is literally the constitutional end of the United Kingdom, by the way. It is literally the constitutional end. We've talked about ending nation states. That did it in significant part, and it must be reversed.
Let me interrupt you slightly for 1 second. Yeah. But to be fair to Nigel, he has been doing this since the early 90s, and he's been doing this far longer than you, Ben.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But you know my answer to that? I couldn't care less. If you put yourself in a position of pivotal importance and you usher the country into voting for something, you corral people to vote for something that is a dramatic change in the direction in which the country's going, you are then obliged to stay on the battlefield. You don't actually have the personal right to vacate.
So, to put a bit of a defence of Nigel,
I'd like to have a debate with Nigel. Nigel, if you're watching this, I'm happy to have this debate with you.
You could argue, Nick Candy is friends with a lot of people, and maybe he's personally friends with Tony Blair, but he has political disagreements, whatever. Some of the other people around Nigel, you can criticise them, but Nigel's leader of the party. He says that he wants to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and in order to do that, you can't just focus on, your sort of core or base voters. You have to expand your voter base, and you have to do that by being more inclusive and, perhaps being slightly watering down the message to try and encourage more people to support
Oh,
reform.
then I think he's entirely misreading the electorate.
But you said earlier, which I found was really interesting, this point about, well, in order to get political power, you shouldn't, water down your message, essentially,
Yeah.
right? But isn't it important to get power in the first place?
Yeah.
Isn't it utterly naive
Yeah.
to say, well, we can only just be hardcore on everything,
Not hardcore.
right, okay,
Nothing I've said is hardcore. Everything I've said was politically absolutely mainstream in the 1980s. No illegal migration, deportation of anyone who came here illegally, keeping immigration under control, being proud of your country. All these things, they were mainstream. You're saying it's hardcore.
I'm not saying it's hardcore.
yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
I'm saying that it's pretty right wing, and you can
Colloquially right-wing.
you can say it's
Yeah,
mainstream or whatever, but that's
Yeah.
I suppose that's the thing that we're debating, is whether it is mainstream or not. But my point to you is that I think the left have been very, very good at getting power and using power and wielding power, and the right has been useless at that. And I think you have to be quite politically smart in order to gain power and
Yeah.
then to wield power properly. And I think it's slightly naive to say that you can only you can't sort of tailor the message to the electorate in order to win power.
Well, this is where I think actually, as it happens, I think Nigel is reading the electorate wrongly.
Yeah.
The electorate want everything I've just said. They want it. That's why they voted to leave the EU in 2016. That's why, even though they didn't know it, they thought Theresa May was honest. That's why they basically returned Theresa May in 2017. That's certainly why they voted for the Brexit Party in 2019 in large numbers. It's why they voted for Boris Johnson. And let's just look at that 2019 election for a second, since we're talking about how do you get power. Boris Johnson had a turnout of about 67.5%, and I think, going by memory, about 13 point odd million votes for the for the Tory party in 2019. The Brexit party didn't show because Nigel stood us down. We had a few votes. The Labour Party got 10.3 million votes, or thereabouts, in 2019. Wind the clock on to 2024, the turnout had fallen to 59.5%, and the Labour Party got 9.7 million votes. Their vote, they had 600,000 fewer votes in 2024 than they did in 2029. People say that's voter apathy. It's not voter apathy. It's voter despondency. The voters had voted for Brexit, they voted for Boris, they voted for the Brexit Party, and they kept getting let down. The entire settled populace of all of Western civilization wants the agenda that Trump is delivering. You're right, you look across Europe, that's what everyone wants. They can't get it in Europe because they've got PR. But the people of Europe want an end to open borders. They want an end to the rampant immigration they've had. They want an end to net zero and all of that garbage. We want that in this country. The majority want that in this country. The Americans wanted it. What we need to do, the important thing that we've got to do, is stay true to those values and communicate those values and make sure that when we get into office, those of us, when I say we, people collectively who believe in this, when we get into office with a cohort of people who are capable at delivering the agenda which we believe in.
Just finally on reform, how long does this sort of feud with Nigel and reform go back? I know obviously you've been critical for a couple of years now. How long does it go back for you personally? Because obviously you've been involved in the party since 2019. Is that correct?
And, well, I was part of the Brexit Party, which kind of disbanded, but I stayed campaigning on my own.
So does this go back to 2019, this kind of criticism internally, or?
So the first, my antenna first went up when 317 Brexit Party candidates were stood down. But I accepted the argument of a Jeremy Corbyn administration and a second referendum. But the things that really got me down after that was, one, Nigel leaving the battlefield, which I think you have a duty to stay. I know he wanted to go and make money, and at a human level, that's fine. I get it. But then he didn't fight for Northern Ireland. He speaks very rarely about Northern Ireland. And then to say that a united Ireland is inevitable is something that I can't get my head round. He speaks more about the Chagos Islands than he does about Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. There are over 1 million British citizens living in Northern Ireland. It's a pretty crucial segment of the country. And I think if you're not, what kind of country are we if we don't fight for our kin? So I think that's crucial. And yeah, I mean, those are
It does go back a while then.
Yeah, it goes back. It goes
That's
back.
what I was curious about.
It goes back a
Okay.
bit. Yeah.
Let's